Now to get into the program, Barak has an extremely long and impressive resume and has been a lot of places for a long time. He's been I suppose, been working in the Middle East for 20 years now at this stage. Started at a young age. And Barak Barfi has reported extensively for many years from both Iraq and Syria, where he's covertly entered the country many times. Additionally, he was a longtime close friend of Stephen Sotloff, the American journalist who was executed by ISIS this summer. During Sotloff's year in captivity, Barak was the principal advisor and a mediator for the Sotloff family as they tried to negotiate his release. And he served as the family's spokesperson since his death. Barak was also a friend of Peter Kasig, also known as Abdul Rahman, the American aid worker who was just recently killed by ISIS. And outside of that, Barak Barfi is a research fellow with the New America Foundation and a former visiting fellow with the Brookings Institution. Specializing in Arab and Islamic affairs, his articles have appeared in Washington Post, Foreign Policy, New Republic, Jane's Islamic Affairs Analyst, and Project Syndicate. Barfi is also a frequent commentator on CNN, BBC, MSNBC, Fox News, and France 24. He's also fluent in French, I believe, and Arabic, yes, and English. So you can ask in any of those languages, any of the questions, the Q&A. He's also testified before Congress about the threats posed by Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. In addition to his time in Egypt, Iraq, Syria, and Yemen, Barfi spent 6 months in Libya during the recent revolution. Please join me in welcoming Barak Barfi.
Thank you, Ronan. Before I want to start, I want to introduce you all to a veteran of the World Affairs Council, Alan Livingston. This man, I don't think there's anybody in Houston knows more about the Middle East and the world than him. He has contacts all over. He does all the World Affairs Council trips. And if you guys want to learn more about the World Affairs Council and the foreign affairs, please talk to him. He's a great guy, and he's a very good friend, not only of me, but also of Steve. The World Affairs Council brought Steve in for an event a couple years ago. Yeah. Alan is honestly a true pillar of the council. I'd say he's not just my favorite member, but also our best member. Incredible knowledge, but incredibly approachable and amiable. And just while Barak's been here, he set up meetings with the Turkish consulate, the Egyptian consulate, over the Baker Institute with Ambassador Derigian, the former ambassador of Syria and Israel. So, Alan, we don't thank you enough for all you do for the council. So, thank you. Alan is a true friend. Today I want to talk about ISIS, the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria, its origins, its growth, and the threat it poses to the United States. ISIS's history begins with a man named Abu Musab al-Zarqawi. He was a Jordanian. He was a thug. He went to prison. In prison, he found Jesus, or in his case, Muhammad. He became very religious. He then traveled to Afghanistan in 1999. He there met a man who I'm sure you're all familiar with, Osama bin Laden. And Zarqawi he wasn't a very smart man. He didn't have college degrees. He didn't know a lot about he didn't know anything about Islamic theology, but he was a great tactician and strategist. And he thought this. He knew that Al-Qaeda was the brainchild of bin Laden, and that bin Laden was a Saudi of Yemeni ancestry. So that bin Laden recruited from those two principal countries, and he also recruited from the Persian Gulf, the countries of Kuwait, Qatar, Oman, Bahrain, and the United Arab Emirates, which I forgot, but unlike Rick Perry, I figured it out real quickly. There were 3 departments I wanted to get rid of. So bin Laden had the Persian Gulf. Ayman al-Zawahiri, who is the current leader of Al-Qaeda, he was Egyptian, so he had all the Egyptians. The countries of Morocco, Tunisia, Algeria, and Libya were very insignificant in the jihadi constellation. So Zarqawi thought this: the Arab world is pretty much carved up. There's one region that's not taken, the Levant. Levant being Syria, Jordan, Lebanon, and Israel and the Palestinian territories. So he goes to bin Laden. He said, I want to take these guys. I want that territory. He refused to pledge allegiance to bin Laden as leader of Al-Qaeda and the jihadist movement. They didn't get along very well, so Zarqawi went to western Afghanistan. And this is Afghanistan here in this beautiful picture. Over here, I'm doing my best weatherman impersonation. He went to the city of Herat, which is in western Afghanistan. And he sets up shop there, and he starts recruiting. Everything's going good, his organization's moving up, until 9/11 happens. He, like all the other jihadists, has to flee, but unlike bin Laden, Zawahiri, and others who move towards Pakistan, and a lot of them get caught up, swept up in the net, he goes to Iran. He stays in Iran for a while, and then he moves to Iraq, and he establishes his base in the northern Iraq, in the Kurdish areas. And there he waits, and he plans. He waits for the American invasion of Iraq in 2003. He started an organization called Tawheed, or monotheism. He has a strategy, a three-pronged strategy. He wants to attack the American forces occupying the country. He wants to attack all the NGOs and the civil contractors that were brought in to rebuild the country. To that end, he attacks the UN compound in the summer of 2003, and the UN chief there is killed, and the UN pulls out. Other civil contractors are pulling out as well. But most importantly, his strategy focuses on creating ultimate chaos in Iraq. And how does he do that? He targets the Shia. The Shia are a minority in Islam. They comprise about 10% of the world's Muslim population. The Sunnis make up 90% of the population. And radical Salafi jihadists, such as Zarqawi, believe that the Shia are heretics. So he has a great theological basis here. So he wants to win over the Sunnis. And he does that. The Sunnis make up about 20-25%, the Sunni Arabs, 20-25% of Iraq's population. The Shia make up about 60% of the population, and the Kurds make up about 20-25%. So the Sunnis are a minority, but they ruled. And when Saddam fell, the Shia took over the country. So he positions himself as the defender of the Sunni community. And he established himself all over the Sunni communities, but mostly, if this is Iraq again, he's out here in Al-Anbar in the west province, which is 100% Sunni. He is killed by the United States in 2005, and but by then he's pledged allegiance to Al-Qaeda, and they rebrand the organization as Al-Qaeda in Iraq. After his death, the organization starts its gradual decline. Why? Zarqawi the power went to his head, and he thought that he could do whatever he wanted, so he started clipping people, Soprano style, when they got in his way in the Sunni community, and there was a lot of backlash. At the same time, we have the Sunni awakening and the surge, and by 2008, Al-Qaeda is decimated. We pull out our troops around that time. Obama comes into office. He wants to have nothing to do with Iraq. And it looks good because we've reduced the violence. They're on their way to reconciliation. Al-Qaeda has been decimated. So there's really no reason for us to stay. 2011, a revolution breaks out in Syria. First it's peaceful, but eventually it becomes armed. And at first, most of them are moderate, sons of the villages, people of the city. But it takes a turn for the worse, and jihadists start filtering in. In January 2012, an organization called Jabhat al-Nusra announces its formation, and it posts its video clips and propaganda on password-encrypted forums associated with Al-Qaeda. So everybody thinks this is an Al-Qaeda front, but they never say that they're part of Al-Qaeda. They don't call themselves Al-Qaeda. But in April 2013, a very big event happens in the jihadist world. Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the head of Al-Qaeda in Iraq, releases a statement saying that Al-Qaeda in Iraq and Jabhat al-Nusra have merged, and they've created the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria, or ISIS. At that point in time, the leader of Jabhat al-Nusra releases a statement saying, wait, nobody consulted me on this. I'm pledging allegiance to Ayman al-Zawahiri as head of al-Qaeda. Ayman al-Zawahiri comes out and says, you AQI guys, go back to Iraq. You're in Iraq, Jabhat al-Nusra is in Syria. That's how I'm dividing things up. But ISIS doesn't accept it and starts overrunning Jabhat al-Nusra. And we see the first real big split in the jihadist community that's playing out in front of us in these forums. And the analysts are just amazed. By the summer of 2013, ISIS becomes the strongest brigade in the northern provinces of Syria. Why? Because the so-called moderate rebels from the Free Syrian Army are not moderate, and they don't do a lot of rebelling. What they do is they're involved in stealing grain, stealing cars, shaking people down for money. These guys aren't fighting for freedom's sake, they're fighting for their pocket's sake. And they just want to make money. And they increasingly oppress and torment the local population. Whereas the al-Qaeda people, Jabhat al-Nusra and ISIS, when they come into an area, they ensure security, they ensure that people aren't shaken down, they install some type of good governance, and people respect that. And that is why the FSA decreased in influence and significance, and Jabhat al-Nusra and ISIS, mostly ISIS, increased. ISIS then, in the end of 2013, the beginning of 2014, a few brigades get together. The Saudis approach them and say, we'll give you money, you go fight ISIS. So they start fighting ISIS and they dislodge ISIS. Again, if this is Syria, they're here in the north. They dislodge them here into the province of Raqqa in the east. The ISIS looks like it's on its last legs, that it's going to fall apart. It's going to stop being a threat. So the Americans take their eye off of it. However, ISIS has 9 lives, and it resurrects itself. In the summer of 2014, it begins to make inroads in Iraq. It takes the city of Mosul, the second largest city. It takes Baji, the oil refinery. It takes over a lot of other oil fields. And it's now threatening to extend its grip. Many of you know that we intervened in the conflict in Iraq, and the reason that we gave was because 50,000 Yazidis, a minority, were stranded on a mountain without food and water, and they were going to die. So we started bombing. But the real truth is, if you guys are going to study foreign relations, nobody acts for altruistic or humanitarian reasons. They act for national interests and strategic interests. And in this case, we were scared that ISIS was going to make a run on the Kurdish areas. And we are very good friends with the Kurds. They're our best ally in the region, and they've created a very good government in northern Iraq. And we couldn't allow that to fall. So we intervened and we bombed. At that point in time, ISIS came out and it killed the first American, Jim Foley, a journalist. It then killed my good friend Stephen Sotloff. It killed some more Brits. And finally, last weekend, it killed another friend of mine, Peter Kasich. The United States then got involved and tried to come up with a strategy to defeat ISIS, in the president's word, to degrade and ultimately destroy ISIS. That is America's policy. But we are not going about it the right way, and why is that? The first thing is we've decided that we are going to arm the moderate rebels. That policy failed. Some of the rebels tried to sell the weapons that we gave them. And then 2 weeks ago, one of the main groups that we depend on fled the province of Idlib, and they turned over their weapons to Jabhat al-Nusra or al-Qaeda. In Syria, al-Qaeda has our weapons. In Iraq, ISIS overran the Iraqi army and took our weapons. So al-Qaeda is getting our goodies from both sides. Another prong of that strategy is that we want to train the rebels. But according to the United States, we can only train 5,000 a year. And one of the leading military analysts in Washington says it'll take 3 to 5 years to train them. And in 3 to 5 years, ISIS will be even stronger. So that's not going to work. The third pillar of our strategy is an air campaign. I think many of you have seen how successful that is with the ISIS assault on Kobani, the Kurdish city in northern Syria. Even though we're bombing them every day, they're making inroads. And it's supposed to be the opposite. We bomb them and they retreat, not we bomb them and they make progress. Air campaigns never work on their own. They need to be part of a larger strategy. And I'll give you 3 examples. In 1991, we invaded, Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait. We decided we were going to dislodge him. We bombed Kuwait in Iraq for about a month. That did not dislodge Saddam Hussein's forces from Kuwait. He did not sue for peace. He only did that when we invaded with ground forces and created the Highway of Death, which was just dozens of miles of burned out fuselage and chassis of tanks and armored personnel carriers and whatnot. In Kosovo in 1998, we had we bombed the Serbs, who we wanted them to withdraw from Kosovo. We did that, I think, for about 79 days, maybe a little longer. That's the number that's coming into my head. That didn't work alone. It was only when the Russians went to the president of Serbia and they said, the Americans are going to invade in a ground invasion very soon, did he sue for peace. And the last example is in Libya. We decided to make a no-fly zone and bomb Gaddafi. And everybody said at the beginning, oh, it's a matter of time before Gaddafi falls. Gaddafi's got weeks. Well, Gaddafi had a lot of weeks. He had about 5.5 months worth of weeks because the air power alone doesn't work. And there we had a ground component. We were coordinating with the rebels in Libya. They were our friends. And even then it took so long. This campaign will never work if there's no ground component, if we don't have any coordination with the rebels, if we don't have what's called combined armed operations. If I bomb them, the bad guys here, I need you guys in the back to aim your mortars and your tank shells here at the same time to dislodge the troops. And we don't have that. That's what's called combined arms operations. And we don't have any of that. And when you don't have that, you're not going to make any progress. We need to have boots on the ground. We need to either support the Syrian Kurds, who are very anti-ISIS. They are secular. They are not shaking down the people under their control. They've done great work in Qamishli, in the northern areas. These are some of the things that we need to do, but the president is not willing to do that. And what do we see instead? We're increasingly seeing a Vietnamization of the conflict. What does that mean? You fight with one hand tied behind your back, and you gradually escalate. And we've seen that in the last few weeks. We've seen the president approve 1,500 troops, additional troops to go in as advisors. And you slowly add advisors. This is what Kennedy needed. He added advisors, and then they started bringing in troops. And this is what we're going to see, because we are not fighting the war the way we need to. Is ISIS a threat to the United States? Will we see another 9/11? Will we see another attack? I don't think so. Why? It takes a lot of time, money, and effort to create the cell and the infrastructure to have a 9/11. That attack took years to plan. And the planners left the country. They went to Prague. I'm sorry, they went to Prague for meetings. They went to Malaysia for meetings. They needed money. So I don't think we'll see that right now. But there is a possibility we'll see lone wolf attacks. What's a lone wolf attack? I start hating the United States. I surf the web. I find speeches by radical clerics like Anwar al-Awlaki or other jihadists who speak in English. They say attack Western interests. So I decide I am going to place a bomb in an area that will kill people. Or I just start shooting people at will. And that's what a lone wolf is. It's hard to detect because the guy doesn't communicate with the jihadists in Europe and in the Arab and Islamic worlds. So this is something we might see. I wanted to end the discussion by talking about Steve, right? Steve Sotloff was my best friend He was an American journalist. I saw him the morning he was kidnapped. I spoke to him 10 minutes before he was kidnapped. He was already in Syria. And I informed his parents that he had been kidnapped, likely been kidnapped. I then served as the principal advisor to the family. And it was very difficult because we felt alone. I've spoken about this on TV. I told Anderson Cooper about it. We didn't feel that the administration did everything that they could. We felt we were all alone. And we saw that Europeans were coming out while the Americans weren't. And ultimately, Steve, Jim, and Pete died in captivity. And they became very close. How do we know this? Because the released hostages contacted us and they told us stories about Jim and Pete and Steve, how they would talk about football and how they played Risk, how they played chess, how Steve cheated at chess. We have memories of Steve that will hold forever. And Steve and Jim did not serve this country, but in their captors' eyes, they represented America. And they died at the end because they were Americans, because their country wouldn't do what the other countries did. And they are heroes. Jim Foley was tortured severely in captivity, but it never broke his spirit. He was always positive. He suffered horrible tortures for more than 1.5 years in captivity. The hostages said that the hostages didn't like each other, but nobody had a bad word to say about Jim. They had it very, very hard in there for very long, and they saw all the other hostages get out, and there was no word from us on the outside. And they thought that they had been abandoned. They don't know what we did for them, and they'll never know. But it's important that you people know what happened, how they suffered, why they suffered for being American, and that our great nation didn't step up to get them out. Thank you very much for coming. I would be happy to answer questions on ISIS or any of the other Middle East.
Thanks. Maybe just open it up to questions. I just had one question to start things off. A lot of people attribute a lot of ISIS's kind of phenomenal military success to the fact that they have kind of Ba'athist elements in there, some of the remnants of Saddam Hussein's military structure there. I mean, that was a classically secular, anti-fundamentalist regime, obviously. So how's it the two get along? And do you think if ISIS keeps becoming so extreme that some of those, older leftover Ba'athist elements will kind of start to go against them?
Okay, so I'm going to take this question back. When a group takes power and it's not strong enough to take power on its own, it takes power with others. And I'll give you a great example. In Syria in 1963, there was a revolution. The Ba'ath Party. The Ba'ath Party is a socialist party, pan-Arab. They took power, but they weren't strong enough on their own. So what did they do? They approached what were called the Nasrists. The Nasrists were supporters of the Egyptian president Jamal Abdel Nasser, and they approached independent officers. And what does that mean? They didn't really have an ideology. They just didn't like the present government, and they took power. And over the next 3 years, they eliminated first the independents, then the Nasrists, and then the old school Baathists they didn't agree with. And by '66, they had a second revolution. That's what usually happens. They're just not strong. ISIS wasn't strong enough to take over by themselves. The Baathists provide very key military expertise that the ISIS cadres do not have. So they rely on them. And over time, they will eliminate them. As they get stronger, they'll have no need for them, and they'll be infighting. I think it was Karl Marx who said, all revolutions devour themselves. The Nazi Revolution, they had, I think they were the Brown Shirts, was a paramilitary organization led by Ernest Röhm. Hitler turned against them, and he killed them in their beds in 1935, I believe. We see this in most revolutions, where the element that helps bring the party to power, that's a little radical, that doesn't agree with what you want is eventually eliminated.
Okay. Any questions out there?
Yeah, I have like two questions. How would you describe when ISIS get the power to go to the Iraqi cities without the resistance from the Iraqi military? Where's the Iraqi military to protect the Iraqi people if they were trained by American army? And the second question is, who do you think funding ISIS? How they're getting money and what else?
Okay, so for us, there's something that's called military strategy. It's called unit cohesion. What happens to your unit when they get fired upon? And in that case, the unit cohesion was very poor, and they disbanded and they ran. Why is that? They didn't know what they were fighting for. These mostly Shia fighters who are from different parts of the country, and they don't know why they're protecting the Sunnis that didn't like them and were turning on them. So they just cut and run. They don't have a lot of loyalty to the state. Their loyalties lie elsewhere. They don't have a professional army. Whereas ISIS is fighting for ideological reasons, and people who fight for ideological reasons are always stronger and more unified and have that higher level of unit cohesion. So that is why even if you have more fighters than your opponent, but if you're not fighting for the right reasons, or the group hasn't come together the way it should, you will likely lose. Second question, financing. Financing originally came from wealthy Persian Gulf donors. Like I said, ISIS aspires to be a soprano family. They run protection rackets. They made a lot of money in Mosul shaking people down. They kidnapped, I know for a fact, they had this Christian guy, they arrested him. They said that he was public intoxication, but the truth was that he was in their prison because his father was a wealthy factory owner and they wanted to shake him down. Then they made a lot of money off the kidnappings. I can't remember if it's $20 to $30 million, I can't remember. But now they make money off oil. They make more than $1 million a day off oil, selling oil. They sell oil to the Syrian regime, they sell oil to the rebels, they sell oil to the, smuggle out to Turkey. They'll sell oil to anyone that wants it, including Alan if he goes there. So that's where they make a lot of money, and they tax. They have a state. The president said ISIS isn't a state, but my mom told me if it walks like a duck and it quacks a duck, it's a duck. And they're taxing their citizens.
And they said they're going to introduce a currency too, right?
Yeah, and you know what? This is what you read the newspapers, and they all made fun of them. The New York Times, which is, you know, in America, it's gospel. If it's printed in the New York Times, it happened, even if it didn't happen. I don't care. That's the way it works. And they disparaged the introduction of a currency, and they're bringing currency specialists to say, well, the efficiency of a currency depends on the ability of others to accept it as such. That's malarkey. They are not printing a currency so that they can issue bonds in that currency in Europe. They're issuing that currency to show others that we are a state, that we are creating an Islamic state. And historically, if you look at minting coins in the Islamic world, there is a propaganda value. Salah ad-Din, a lot of you know, defeated the Crusaders in Hittin in 1187. He minted coins that said he dislodged, he defeated the defenders of the cross, and he brought back the Abbasids. What does that mean? He defeated the Crusaders externally, and internally, as a Sunni leader, he defeated the Shia that ruled Egypt at that time. He's issuing propaganda through his coins. Leaders of the Islamic world mint coins in their names. That is what minting coins is all about. It's an exercise in propaganda. It's an exercise in showing that you are strong, that you have a state. And that is what they're doing. Slowly but slowly, they're building a state. And that state is not going to collapse unless we do something about it. And dropping bombs is not going to do it.
Just to finish up on the point about the funding, I know obviously originally a lot of the money was coming, say, from Kuwaitis or Saudis and, you know, the Emirates. But I know there's the three of them have had a big issue, the Qataris lately, and withdrew their ambassadors and whatnot with regards to support of the Brotherhood and all that sort of stuff. What do you see Qatar's role still being there in the region? I mean, are they just kind of...
Well, I know that Qatar does not have relations with ISIS. I know that it's very hard for them to get into ISIS. They do not fund ISIS, but we know because the Department of Treasury sanctions foreigners for providing money to the jihadists, that some wealthy Qataris have funded Jabhat al-Nusra and ISIS. We know that. We know in Kuwait, the Ajami family, very influential family, was involved in funding extremists. The money comes from there. You know, a famous man once said, follow the money. And the money goes all back to the Gulf. But now they don't need that money. They got their own money. They're minting coins. They've got the oil. There's talk of that bank robbery.
And Tarek?
Yeah, let's go back to the funding of ISIS initially. Yes, now it's self-financing with the oil and whatnot. But yes, we can blame certain individuals. But wasn't it certain countries opened the doors for what's defined as certain individuals? Can you talk about that? In other words, the involvement of specifically of Qatar and whatnot in the funding initially of ISIS, or it's a taboo topic?
Yeah, well, they didn't fund, the state of Qatar did not fund ISIS, and I don't think they funded AQI as well. You had wealthy people in these countries. They don't need the state. There are billionaires in all these countries that have so much money, they can swim in it. And they work on their own, or maybe with tacit understanding with the governments. I'm not a terrorism financier, so I can't talk about that in depth. But we see who gets sanctioned. We can follow the money. We can see who's lax on terrorism financing laws, who allows money to get passed from the countries. Some of these countries have clamped down in recent years, but during the American occupation, they allowed for the passage of money to the insurgents.
Okay, let's get there. I'll get you next. Okay. Yeah, back there.
One, how much did the failure of the Iraqi army have to do with Nouri al-Maliki removing the top Iraqi generals and filling them with his political cronies? And second question is, it's been suggested that some of the countries in the region that are our enemies, like Iran, might offer to help us in dealing with ISIS, but do you think that's a good idea, even if our interests are aligned on this one point, is it good or bad to align ourselves with groups like this?
So when you purge top levels of the military and you install your cronies instead, you're going to have a reduction in the professionalism of the military. And I'll give you the great example with Syria. The military was purged, historically purged, specifically after the 1963 Ba'ath Revolution. They put people in power that were loyal to them. They put people in power that were Alawis and minorities, such as the Ismailis and Druze. They removed the Sunni officer corps. And it led to an army that didn't have a professional officer corps, an effective officer corps in the '67 war. That is a very big problem that they had. That when you count on your cronies and you put people who are loyal to you and not loyal to the state, and you make decisions based on that, you're going to suffer. Your military is going to suffer. The second question, which I have now forgotten.
Countries like Iran.
Okay, yeah. So Iran. Iran and the United States share short-term interests in Iraq. Get rid of ISIS. But long-term, their interests diverge. Iran has no interest in a inclusive government. Its interests are purely to keep Iraq Shia and under its feet. And that doesn't jive well with what we want. We want to appease everybody in the region, including our Sunni allies, who think that the Sunnis in Iraq should have some representation. So, and in Syria, we don't agree at all. We don't. They support the regime, and we don't. So we have to tread very lightly when the Ayatollahs offer us anything.
Considering the political, never-ending political instability in Pakistan, are there potential, like-minded people getting together over a nuclear bomb discussion?
I'm going to add on to the question so that it's because Baghdadi refers to a caliphate or something like that in multiple times, especially after he has controlled the 20% of the northern and western part of Iran. I'm sorry, Iraq was a far right there. But do you think it's like people will be attracted to ISIS, and can it spread beyond the 4 countries or 5 countries to South Asia and stuff?
Al-Qaeda historically makes progress in ungoverned or undergoverned spaces, and that's what we have in Syria. There's no regime anymore. There's no government anymore. There's just factions, and increasingly in Iraq, which was dismembered by the United States, and we're putting Humpty Dumpty back together, and we're finding it's very difficult even after we're not there. I wouldn't see ISIS making inroads in Jordan. Jordan, the government is very strong. The army is loyal to the king. Lebanon is a factional state. Very hard for anybody to do anything in Lebanon. And then you have the Gulf countries, which they can use money to get out. They got a special get out of jail free card. It's called money. So that's the way you have to look at that at this point in time. And they want to just focus on Iraq and Syria because they know that that's where they can do it.
I think they're asking about Southeast Asia, Pakistan in particular. Where do you see ISIS getting a foothold there?
Well, we know that Al-Qaeda has historically had relations with groups in Indonesia, groups in the Philippines. But there it's a little bit more difficult. You need to have financing. You need to move the money around. You need to move, you have to bring in envoys. And that takes a lot of time, effort to set up the infrastructure. And I just don't see them being able to make those inroads right now. And I see them really just focusing on the Arab world. They'd like to move into Jordan. If they can do Jordan, that'd be the next country they'd like to. But they're not going to be able to. I mean, you just say Zarqawi in Jordan, and everybody gets mad and is ready to march in the street.
Good question. I know we have a ton of questions, right? Then you two, and then we'll go up front. Okay. Yeah, I'll get you after. Okay.
Yeah, I guess my question was, you said that the current administration could have done more. What more could they have done?
They didn't really work with the families. They didn't consult us. There's some intelligence stuff that I can't talk about because there's one more American in captivity. What we knew and when we knew it and what was done with that. The relationships that they had with us. We said that we felt threatened by a senior White House official that we would be prosecuted if we paid ransom. And the administration is denying that when several people in the room said they agreed that they heard that. So just things like that could have been done.
And were you also referencing it in terms of a general Syria policy? Or you were specifically referring to the kidnappings?
Well, I guess I'm curious in both cases.
Okay. I just didn't know. I just wanted to make sure you were getting the answer.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, like I said about what we can do in Syria is we can support the Kurds. We can put boots on the ground. Those are the two biggest things that we can do right now. Make it a national priority. And it just doesn't seem like that. Don't do stupid stuff. It's not a policy. And that's what this administration is all about. So those are the two options that I would make at this point in time.
You spoke of the U.S.'s long-term interest as an inclusive state. Do you think that Iraq, as it's currently drawn, has the opportunity to be a singular inclusive state? And if so, kind of what might that require?
No, not at all. The Kurds don't want to be part of Iraq. The Kurds do everything in their power to just keep them all away. They say the right things. They work towards federalism. They're making money off their oil. So they're happy They're happy just the way things are, and they don't want to integrate into the Iraqi state. And frankly, when you look at the Arab world, there is no mosaic. There is no inclusive society that encompasses all types of minorities. There's no respect for minorities. Look at Lebanon. They fought a revolution, a civil war for 15 years because they all couldn't get along, agree on who has rights and who doesn't. That's what the Arab world is. The Shia in Saudi Arabia have no rights. They're 10%. The Copts in Egypt are 10%. They don't feel comfortable. The Shia in Bahrain make a majority of about 65%. The number of Christians have been migrating extensively. The Christian population has been dwindling extensively for decades now because they just don't feel comfortable in the Arab world. So if you have all this evidence, what makes you think that Iraq, which is just a vacuum of violence, is going to be any different?
Yeah, in your opinion, do you think the USA, if they intervene since the revolution started in Syria, like the first 6 months, ISIS will emerge? And I have another question. The other question, why ISIS they're not fighting the Assad regime, especially in the area that he's in control?
Had we intervened in the first 6 months, would there be ISIS? No. Why? Because it takes time for the jihadists to come in and establish their infrastructure network and for people to get sick of and fed up of the locals who do bad stuff. So they would have, had they done that at the beginning, there probably would be no ISIS. But the United States wasn't going to get involved in a conflict in the first 6 months that was peaceful, and it wasn't armed, and they didn't have anybody to support. And you have to understand, when a conflict happens, the United States doesn't know who the good guys are and who the bad guys are. It takes them a lot of time to figure that out. So that is a problem. What was the second question?
Like, why ISIS they're not fighting the Assad?
They're not fighting the Assad regime because many people think that they're colluding together, that they work together, that that the regime created ISIS, that the regime doesn't bomb ISIS areas, that ISIS doesn't fight the regime. So these are questions that I think only the soothsayer can answer, the guy who looks in his ball.
What would your just guess be?
Could be that ISIS has a different strategy, and they're looking to gain land and territory in other places. They join operations against the regime at the end, right before. So what happens with, let's say I encircle a military base. I encircle this military base. And it takes a lot of time to move the troops here, and here, and here, and here. And I'm mortaring and I'm shelling them at the beginning. And over time, I gradually encroach on that base. And then I finally take the base. That's a months-long project. It takes a lot of months. So ISIS, it doesn't start here when everybody's massing the base, the troops. It joins the fight when they're right outside the walls, and they've shelled 80% of the walls and brought them down of the base. So my point is that it does fight the regime, but it comes in late just to share in the spoils of war. Because it's focused on doing other things and fighting in different areas. So there's many reasons why.
And what is ISIS's current relationship with al-Nusra Front, the kind of existing al-Qaeda, you know?
Well, they fought for a long time because ISIS grew out of Nusra, and they got the fighters from them. But lately, I've seen some evidence to show that they are working together on some level. I don't know how strongly they are. They have completely split. ISIS kicked out Jabhat al-Nusra from Deir ez-Zor, which is here in the eastern part of the country. So I don't really think they're ever going to kiss and make up.
Why do you think this administration failed so badly at influencing al-Maliki to hold up promises to the Sunnis or encourage more Sunni inclusion when we were withdrawing?
Why didn't the administration do anything?
Yeah.
The administration didn't do anything because it didn't want to do anything. Obama was elected to get out of Iraq, not stay in Iraq and hold hands and sing Kumbaya. This was the problem in Iraq. We just wanted to go. We wanted to cut and run and say, okay, mission accomplished, let's get out of here. We didn't really care what Maliki was doing. Bush used to speak to him once a week, I believe, by conference, video conference. Obama and Maliki never talked. You know, he passed him off to his aides. So we didn't really want to know what was going on there. We didn't want to be involved. We didn't want to lean on Maliki. We didn't want him to give us, make the concessions that needed to be done. And we wanted others to get involved. Look, and also look, are we going to be able to police the world alone? Is it all on our shoulders? Do we have to spend billions of dollars in taxpayer money to do these things? Sometimes we have other interests, other matters that are more important. And in 2008, 2009, this economy was the most important thing in this country. We were facing the greatest recession since the Depression. Our banks were going to fail. Our banking system was going to fail. The whole capitalistic system was going to fail. All those socialists and communists were going to say, we were right, if the government didn't step up. If we didn't have the Depression and we didn't have all these federal programs in place, it would have collapsed. It would have been a run on everything. And that's what Obama was really focused on. He wasn't focused on fixing Iraq anymore.
And just to follow up, I mean, do you think, I mean, wouldn't the Iranians have had more say over Maliki than the U.S. anyway? I mean, wouldn't that kind of be the...
Of course. The minute you withdraw the troops, we're not the ultimate arbiter anymore. What sticks do you have? You use, in foreign policy, I watched a video where Ali G interviews his former Secretary of State, James Baker. And James Baker tells him, and he says to him, Ali G says, well, tell me a little bit about the foreign policy. And he says, well, in foreign policy, we use carrots and sticks. We offer people carrots, and when we don't think they're doing what we want, we then use sticks. And we didn't have any sticks against Iraq anymore. We were out of the country. As the Iranians are the major arbiter there, and that is why our interests diverge in the long term with them. They are Shi'i at core. They want to ensure Shi'i rule. They don't care about alienating and marginalizing and isolating the Sunnis, because they are not Sunni. They defend the Shia in the Islamic world.
One question, speaking about the question about the Gulf countries not financing these extremist groups, but billions of dollars from those Gulf countries go to finance extremist thinking, fundamental laws. It goes to Pakistan, it goes to US in mosques, it goes everywhere. And so when these type of extremist organizations crop up, ISIS is just one group. There are all these extremists, so they recruit people from this. Like there's wall chalking, that's from Pakistan. They're on walls, they're chalking for supporting ISIS. Nobody is exactly funding them, but it's these extremist groups who suddenly say, okay, now there's this group, let's go and have religion.
Hassan's a lot like Waldo. At every speech I am, he's there. I think he's like my biggest fan, or he could be my biggest stalker. Hassan's great. He's got a lot of good input. Hassan, you're right, 100% right. Radicalism, jihadist radicalism is fueled by theological extremism. And all these texts that the Saudi petrodollars are funding, the Wahhabi texts, the dissemination of Salafi texts, of Hanbali texts, of puritanical, intolerant texts that we see that sometimes emerged in classical and pre-modern Islam. Yes, it's a problem, but the thing is, we cannot. You know, there was a famous Russian saying: "Go after many rabbits, you won't catch any, but if you go after one, you'll catch it." And we're focusing now on terrorism financing. We're focusing on getting the Gulf countries on board on turning off the spigots. That's what we want. We can't talk to them about, you see this text, the Ibn Taymiyyah text, where it talks about, you know, the infidels are all innovators and you can't be friends with them. No, we need you to stop printing those. They're not going to do that. It's much more difficult to get them to do that. It takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of effort, and you've got to know what your interests are. And our interests are terrorism financing right now. The extremism and the hate, that's going to take time.
Let's go there, and then I'll go back over here. Okay.
Why isn't Europe more involved with destroying ISIS? A strong ISIS is a greater risk to Europe than the U.S., I would think, with all the recruits that are coming to the call.
Well, we've got the French on board. You know, France has done a 180, a volte-face, and it supported us in all these campaigns. We've got the Brits on board because a lot of the Brits have gone there. The Germans don't want to get involved in anything anymore. They don't want anything. The Italians never get involved in anything. The only reason they got involved in Libya was because all their oil comes from Libya. Berlusconi said after Gaddafi was killed, it was a mistake. You know, he didn't want to be involved in it, but he knew that his Italian interests, economic interests, would have been greatly jeopardized had he not gotten involved in that. That's what Europe is. It's the British, it's the French, and the Germans, and then you've got, it's like Gladys Knight and the Pips, and the rest of them are the backup singers. All right? I'm a Motown guy, so I love anyone that has to do with Motown. Martha and the Vandells, Temptations.
All of these conflicts have been very close to Turkey. What has been the role of Turkey with this conflict?
Alan is good to answer that question. Alan knows a lot of Turkey.
What's been the role of Turkey?
Well, we spent 2 hours today with the Consul General of Turkey, who we both feel is incredibly up-and-comer in the Turkish area of State Department. Very knowledgeable. I can't say enough good things about him. But Barak and him had a really great one-on-one discussion. And I think you have to find out where Turkish policies separate from the personality of Erdogan. And I think that's a big issue, and that's an issue that Barak, through the contacts today, hopes to develop more and write more, because there's not been a lot of discussion about what is Turkish policy in Erdogan. Does he totally dominate it? How does he shape it? What other interests are there? So I think it's important where Turkey basically comes down on. But one thing I think people have to realize, Turkey has its own interests. And Turkey is a big economic power in the last few years, and a lot of that is through their airlines. Turkish Airlines now flies to more cities than any other airlines in the world. And they have opened that up to economic places and areas that essentially you would not think that there was a Turkish community, but they basically flown there for business. So I think Turkey is right now reevaluating their own position. Initially, as Barak says, there was a personality aspect where Erdogan felt that Assad was almost like a parent looks at a child, and he advised him, he tried to work with him, and then Assad went his own way, and what happened was Erdogan then acted like a father and said, wait a minute, I'm going to punish you, and the two of them basically have a personality split, and he's been trying to take him down, and he's been the leader of the movement to basically get rid of Bashar. So I think you have a lot of conflicts within Turkish policy right now, and a lot of issues are undecided. Questions like, why didn't Turkey allow some of the Kurdish forces to cross over and to defend the town? They did involve the forces from Kurdistan to go through their fighting groups, and they did, but only for a short period of time. But they wouldn't allow the Turkish forces from other groups that are not necessarily affiliated with the PKK, but have some identity of their own. They didn't allow them to cross over and to defend the town on the Turkish border. So there's a lot of duplicity in Turkish policy, and but it's a very, very important player, and I think that you're not going to find any settlement in that area at all unless you have Turkey involvement.
That's exactly what I think. I mean, I was about to say that.
One point there, which I think you talked about, and that is why Bashar and ISIS basically are not more involved in fighting each other, more involved, because in a sense, they work with each other in one area, and that is everyone looks and sees how bad ISIS is. They're beheading, they're killing people, they're doing everything. And people now suddenly in the West and other areas say, well, wait a minute, Saddam's bad, Bashar is bad, he's terrible, but maybe he's better than ISIS. So as bad as ISIS is, it makes Bashar seem like a lesser evil. And many people are now looking at Syria and saying, wait a minute, if we had gone in there a year ago and tried to destroy his air force and tried to destroy his air power and everything, then who would be in Damascus today? ISIS. And if ISIS was in Damascus today, there'd be far more killings than there are with Bashar. Now, whether that's true or not, but that's an illusion that has basically been created. And Bashar basically tries to say, look, I'm not as bad as the alternative. So that makes an appeal with the West, and there are people in the West that are now waiting and saying, maybe we ought to keep Bashar in there, at least in a segment of Syria, to protect the area around Latakia and some of the other areas where the minorities are located. I don't know, Barak may have something to disagree or add to that.
So the problem here is that America's stated policy is regime change in Syria, that Bashar al-Assad has lost legitimacy. However, at this point in time, we didn't really do anything to that to bring about that policy to bring it to fruition. And now we've decided that ISIS is public enemy number one. So we are working to degrade and ultimately destroy that. We are funding the rebels and we are arming and training them. We want them to go fight ISIS. The problem is when they go fight ISIS, who wins? The regime, because the regime loses its number one adversary, its strongest adversary. And it's likely that the regime could fill the vacuum in Raqqa and other areas. And ISIS won't be encroaching on regime areas. So the dilemma is, you weaken ISIS, you strengthen the regime. So what are we going to do long term? Another question is that many people are asking is, why are we fighting Syria? What's our problem with the regime? Because they're not killing any Americans. You know, it's been 30 years since the Syrian government was actively involved in killing American civilians. We don't get involved in local conflicts. We don't really get involved we don't invade countries to kill their own citizens. We didn't get involved in China during the Cultural Revolution, during Mao's Cultural Revolution. We don't do anything in North Korea, and they are killing a lot of their people and putting them in work camps and whatnot. We didn't get involved in Burma, otherwise known as Myanmar, when they had problems there. We're not invading Cuba. So why are we going to get involved in Syria? This is the strategic thinking that's guiding a lot of what the realists would say. The realists say, don't stay out of the conflict because you've got no interest there. The liberals and the idealists say you must intervene, like Samantha Powers, who is the United Nations, American ambassador to the United Nations. You've got to intervene for humanitarian reasons. You've got to get involved. We can't have slaughters like we had in Rwanda or in the Balkans. But the realists usually win and prevail. And that's why one day in the future we'll have to realize how important is this for us to overthrow Bashar, and what resources are we willing to dedicate to that cause. And I don't think that we're going to be ready to dedicate our army and our military to toppling Bashar. Maybe 15 years ago we would do something like that, but not now. War fatigue has taken over this country. We're just tired of wars. We don't want our kids coming back in the body bags. We don't want to spend our taxpayer dollars on dropping smart bombs that cost hundreds of thousands of dollars each and spend a couple $1 million a day in this war. And we're spending a lot of money. So that is the ultimate dilemma. ISIS's leadership is Iraqi. In Syria, most of its fighters are Syrian. It has a lot of foreigners. I think there's a couple hundred British, a couple hundred French, There's some Americans who've gone to fight. There's a lot of what we call people from the Caucasus areas, otherwise known as Chechnya, and Dagestan, Uzbekistan, and all my Stan friends that I've forgotten. We think there's a lot of them coming from these areas. So it's a big problem. ISIS draws in all these people. Like in that last video that we released Sunday, where they beheaded those Alawi soldiers and then they beheaded Peter at the end, we have already identified 2 Frenchmen. There looked like there was a Filipino guy in there. There looked like somebody from the Caucasus. I'm going to bet he was Uzbeki. I'll take 3 to 1 on anyone who wants to give me he was an Uzbeki. There's a lot of these foreigners are in there. But in the end of the day, it's a Syrian, Iraqi group. And then the Sunnis, will the Sunnis fight? Look, they're already getting involved. The Emiratis, UAE, is sending in their planes to bomb. Jordan is involved. We know Jordan has been involved in some of these operations. The Saudis will do whatever they can to help on this. They're all giving us use of their bases to fight. They've openly declared that they're willing to help us. We've built a coalition. Not Ambassador Derigian would say, well, not like the coalition we built in '91. Yeah, that's right. But a coalition is a coalition nonetheless.
This is more of a philosophical question, but what do you think about the whole trend of radicalization in the world? Radicalization particularly with the religious purposes, as we see in Islam, and radicalization from socialist perspective, which is to change the regime. So how would you see those be different, and how would you see them evolve in the future? Like, would it be the win from the radicalization in religious terms, or radicalization in the Marxist, like socialist terms?
Well, the radicalization in the religion always has its goal as toppling the regimes. All these Al-Qaeda affiliates in the North Africa, AQIM, in Yemen, AQAP, but they can't do that on their own. They're just not strong enough. They don't have enough diehard supporters. So what do? They go to the Marxist perspective, where the people are the ultimate bearers. You mobilize the bases. You have a class struggle. So from a more sociological perspective, you see you need to get the society involved and integrate them into the revolution. And then what happens is you have that revolution that is largely non-ideological radical, but because the radicals are the most organized and the most ideological and more unit cohesive, they take over. They take over the revolutions. They take over the revolution in Iran in the 70s. That was not an Islamic revolution. It was a revolution of the street. The mullahs came in later. The Bolsheviks, it wasn't a Bolshevik revolution. It was a popular revolution. The French Revolution, the Jacobins took power later. The radicals always are the most organized. They're the most they are the most focused. They have their goals laid out, and they usually triumph in a revolution in the short term before their excesses. They overplay their hands with their excesses, and more moderate forces come in. I think Charles Tilly talks a lot about that in his book.
Or what happened in Egypt, obviously.
Or what happened in Egypt as well.
Obviously started out a moderate kind of.
Exactly. The moderate, it was the people in the street. I'm thinking more radical. Because they're not radical. They were just more ideological.
Right. 1 second, just get a question. Sure. There's a question over here? Okay, yes, Carlton.
Okay. So, 2 questions. How large is the ISIS state or the army? How long?
We think about 35. CIA says 35 to 40,000. Okay. Or maybe 25 to 35.
Maybe been about a year and a half, maybe 2 years ago, I watched like an ISIS recruitment deal on the internet.
Don't go. That's a joke. That's a joke.
But the propaganda was pretty terrible. But it was pretty much 5 or 7 steps to achieve an ultimate goal. One of them it started off with Al-Qaeda and weakening the U.S. system and the recession. So they're on step number 4 right now or something. And you know, what we've done, I'm not sure it's per the New York Times or what it was, but Facebook, YouTube, we're cutting down on recruitment. And I've heard that that's somewhat working. And if there's only 30, well, there's not only 30, but there's 30,000 people, and we're cutting down on recruitment, and if people are, you know, dying in wars and everything else, will it eventually, if we do slow that down, the recruitment process, is that a win in a sense?
No, not at this point in time, because they've got everything they need right now. They have a big army. Even if Turkey's now closed the borders, they don't need them to bring in the money. They don't need them to bring in new recruits. They can recruit in the villages under their control. They can indoctrinate through the schools. They are running schools. They are running summer camps for the kids. And it's always education. We don't get this in America because we think that everything is even-handed and impartial. But education is the most important aspect of socialization in the world. Whatever you read in your textbook is how you think. So if in the radical textbooks they say, quote the Quranic verse, don't take the Christians and Jews as your friends. They quote those verses from Quran and say, we can't trust anyone, it's only the Muslims. Everybody else is infidels, everyone else hates the Prophet. They put that in your head at a young age, so you believe that. You learn these rote things. So you give them 5-10 years, they can change half a generation. You know, they can change a generation at the beginning, get them at the youngest ages, get them into high school, because by 18, you believe what you believe. You see the world the way you see it. And in our textbooks, they don't spew out hate and a view of a certain partisan view. We think that we created a country, that we came together because we had no taxation with representation. We fought for freedom. We want other people to have freedom. We respect all the other peoples in the world. We didn't agree with the communists. The fascists tried to overthrow, the Nazis tried to overthrow the world order. Mao was a little bit excessive in China. These are the things that are in our textbooks. It doesn't say America is the greatest country in the world because we believe in the right thing and that everybody else wants to destroy us. And there's a large conspiracy against us.
Just to follow up on Carlton's question, what happened with Al-Qaeda and saying, you know, Anbar Prism, the Anbar Awakening, obviously a large part of the success there is because we had tens of thousands of American, you know, Marines and soldiers on the ground. But also some people would say it's because Al-Qaeda got so extreme, it got so excessive that the stimulus was there for people to rise up against it. And also we paid a lot of money into the Sunni tribes. Do you see something like that possibly happening with ISIS?
Well,
when Al-Qaeda says you're crazy, you're crazy. I mean, this thing, Al-Qaeda's even.
Well, here's the deal, Ronan. The key word there was that we had thousands of Marines on the ground. We had divisions there. You cannot do that. You cannot, and we didn't destroy them. We just degraded them with divisions. We have no troops on the ground, and they're 10 times stronger. How are you going to get that done?
But in terms of the ideology, I mean, do you think there's a chance that, I mean, ISIS, I mean, like saying, Al-Qaeda's kicked out ISIS, said you're too extreme. Do you think their own extreme version of Islam is going to start kind of wearing on the populace?
Alan, where was it that I talked about cycles? No, that was today with Randy. Basically what happens is cycles, everything is cyclical, and you got to let the cycle play itself out. And what does that mean? Is people eventually get tired of war. The Israelis, when the Palestinians launched the first Intifada in 1987, throwing stones and rocks and stabbing people, the Israelis rallied around the flag and they supported the government. But 5 years later, Yitzhak Rabin campaigned on get Gaza out of Tel Aviv. That's why he wanted to win. And the Israelis embraced that because they saw that force wasn't winning, and they were tired of getting stabbed and shot in the streets. So that cycle played out. The same thing will happen here, likely happen here, that ISIS will overplay its hand, that people will get sick of its violence. But the key here is, there are several keys here. First of all, they got to get more sick of ISIS than they are of the FSA and the regime. That's the number one thing. And as long as there's fighting, they're not going to get sicker of them because they provide more than what the rebels can. My product is better than their product. So why are you going to buy their product? That's number one. Number two, it is very hard to dislodge a jihadist organization when it's taken power, because they don't have elections there. Or if they do, nobody told me about them. The only reason the Taliban were defeated is because we dropped bombs and invaded the country. And they were extremists. That is the dilemma we have. So you've got a cycle that plays out, but to play out the cycle, it's got to be in a vacuum. It cannot be with other cycles of violence next door to you. And that's what we see that. We see the cycle in the rebel areas. If this is the ISIS area, we see the cycle in the rebel areas in the north. And in Iraq, we see the cycles of violence with the regime in ISIS over here. So they're caught between two cycles of violence. They're going to think, hey, our cycle is better than their cycles. So let's stay in this cycle. But yes, eventually, you know, like I said, all revolutions devour themselves. You saw in the French Revolution, the Jacobin Robespierre, who was pioneering all the guillotining. At the end, he went to the guillotine because they all got sick of him. That is what happens in these revolutions. But it takes a lot of time, and you can't have other revolutions going on.
Yeah, question.
Yeah, I wonder if we would be here talking about all of this stuff if we had listened more closely to Scott Ritter before we launched a war in Iraq. Didn't Scott Ritter try to explain why there were no weapons of destruction in Iraq? And what did our media do? Did our media listen carefully to him when he provided the serial numbers, when he provided documentation of what was sold to Iraq, what wasn't? And instead, we just said he was a child molester. And whether he's a child molester or not, wouldn't that be a separate subject? Couldn't we put that to one side and say, let's listen carefully to what he's saying about what's in Iraq? And because he apparently what was there was sludge. That a lot of that stuff after 5 years has a shelf life. It becomes sludge. Can you?
So the problem with Scott Ritter is we don't really like people that are over here and then they move to the other side of the extreme. He was a weapons inspector with the United States. It was believed that the Mossad was giving him information. I believe that he got some of that information of where to look from them. He was pointed at the golden boy of the inspector program and how the Iraqis were obstructing what was going on. And then he comes out in 2002, I believe. I think he wrote that book. I remember reading a long New York Times Magazine piece about him. And he says, no, Iraq doesn't have that. Iraq isn't a problem anymore. It's hard for us to believe, for the public and the press, to believe that. This epiphany and this transformation so quickly. So people think that he's being paid by Saddam. I don't think that was true, because in the article I think he said that he maxed out all his credit cards and he had no money. But this is what, you're going to be discredited by the media. And the bottom line is, no intelligence service had any information that contradicted the American view that he was still working on a weapons of mass destruction program. And in fact, from what we know is, weeks before the revolution, the invasion, he brings in his generals, and they think that they're going to get ready, they're going to have a war strategy, that he's going to give them access to the chemical weapons to use, and he tells them, we have no chemical weapons. And they were shocked. And Saddam didn't divulge what the extent of his program, that it was decimated and destroyed, because he wanted to keep the Iranians guessing, and he didn't want them to invade. So he was playing this game. So how are we supposed to know what's only in his head and nobody else knows? Maybe a handful of people in the country. So he's going about doing things, moving things around. We don't know. Our intelligence is horrible. So everybody else is thinking this. So we're supposed to listen to this man who's done he's done more than a 180. He's almost done like a 360.
And you say the evidence for that is, I'm trying to understand. I met Scott Ritter here in Houston and I asked him these questions, and he seemed like a pretty upfront, honest guy to me. I mean, I'm trying to see so you're saying they found evidence that he was getting money for? I believe
I can't go on the record about this, but I believe that it was, what was it, 97, 98, that his name came to the fore, that that it was said that he had received information, not money, he received information from the Mossad about that. But then the rumors were that he had received money. People were trying to discredit him and say he received money from Saddam. I don't believe that was true.
He said he got it from making a movie, that there was some in film involvement that he was in that generated some money. But he said if I had gotten money from Saddam, I'd be in jail right now. And that makes sense to me.
Well, there's very different ways to make money. Alan will tell you about shell corporations and how to move money. Alan, when he was young, and this is about 70 years ago, was a partner with President Bush, the second President Bush, in an oil company. So he knows about partnerships. He knows, and the reason they did that is because they needed more people. They didn't think Alan was an expert in anything. They just needed a third person to sign the forms to do that. So those are what shell companies are all about. So they can move money when they have to.
So why do you think Saddam was getting rid of his chemical weapons?
So what happened was, he was supposed to. This is such an interesting thing.
Another topic, maybe.
No, this is great. No, this is great. I like talking about this. It reminds me of things, and I can't tell stories like the ambassador told us today. But they had the resolution to end the war, and they wanted him to, get out of Kuwait. They had the no-fly zone in Iraq. And then for some reason, then they tacked on and have him get rid of his weapons of mass destruction. It wasn't even the important part of the UN resolution. They just tacked it on at the end because they're like, oh, well, we found some of these things. But that became the raison d'etre, or the reason for continuing with the sanctions in the no-fly zone. When Clinton comes into office, if you read George Stephanopoulos' memoirs, Clinton gives interviews like, we want to turn a new page with the Iraqis and Saddam. If they're willing to work on some things, we don't have to, continue the sanctions. Saddam doesn't want to play ball. He doesn't want to announce where all his chemical weapons are, the state of his program, and destroy everything. What happens is in 1995, his son-in-law, who is also the defense minister, and his brother defect to Jordan, and they spill the beans on the whole weapons program. So they outflank Saddam. So what does he have to do? He has to get rid of all that stuff. And he basically destroys everything back then. But we don't understand that, because we don't have access to all the places we want. We don't know what's going on. And Saddam doesn't tell us, I've gotten rid of it. Here, you can go into all these places and look. Because he's scared the Iranians are going to invade him if he has no chemical weapons. This is how they think in the Middle East. It's a zero-sum game. Whatever hurts me benefits somebody else. And that was the problem with the weapons program. And that's why we didn't know. That's why Saddam didn't declare. That's why he got rid of it when he got rid of it.
Okay, maybe we'll just do one last question.
Can helping Kurds in Syria initiate the process in Turkey to resolve its own Kurdish question?
How can what?
Helping Kurds in Syria by the United States. Can that one initiate a process in Turkey to
well, hopefully that's the problem, is that the Turks are afraid of that. That if you get unity of the Syrian Kurds and you have the unity of the Iraqi Kurds, the Turkish Kurds are going to want something as well. So that is a road you don't want to go down. You want to separate them if you're pushing the Kurdish question and say it's completely different. Kurds are loyal to their state. They only worry about what's going on in their state. The Iraqi Kurds never, revolted or uprose when the Turkish Kurds were fighting the government. Thank you very much. I'll answer questions one-on-one afterwards.
Thank you all very much for coming. We'll see you again.